Great morning, great middle of the day of gridCONNEXT 2022. I'm Sue Gander. I'm the director of the Electric School Bus Initiative at the World Resources Institute, and I have the great pleasure of moderating this panel of fabulous speakers that's going to help us dive deeper into what does it mean to be facing an incredible transition in the world of electric vehicles, and how do we make sure that the grid is ready for that. And we're going to take a look at that through the lens of fleets, which are moving pretty rapidly in this space. I work very specifically on one of those fleets, which is the school bus fleet of about 500,000 vehicles across the country. And so we'll talk a little bit about that fleet in some of our conversation here, but more broadly are really thinking about all the various fleets that are out there that are really driving some of this transition forward. So I'm going to just mention briefly the speakers that we have. I know you have the bios there. Karen Glittman is the Senior Director of the Center for Sustainable Energy, and she's going to really help us think about what do we need to be planning for? You know, when we ask this question about foundational investments, like what does that really look like, and how can we make sure our planning's in line? We're going to hear from Marie Steele, who's the Vice President of Electrification and Energy Services for NV Energy. She's going to speak a little bit about how is NV Energy planning for the EV fleet transition. And then Amy McGuire is the Director of Market Development at Highland Electric. And she's going to help us drill down a little bit more about where does the V2G and V2X proposition here, specifically around school buses, fit in. So I think it's going to be a really great combination. We'll have these really quick introductory remarks from the three speakers, and then we're going to have a chance to have a discussion, and really looking forward to your questions and hoping that we can answer as many as possible. Our objective today is really to level set on the scope of the EV market, what's coming in the next decade or so, talk about the various different types of grid investments, both hardware, software, as well as human resources, processes, and systems that we need to take a look at, think about the different roles, the players that need to be involved, look at some of the examples of where this is happening. And what we hope you'll walk away from this conversation with is both a greater understanding of the questions that you should be asking yourselves and others, where to look for answers, and then we do hope you have, or at least I hope you have, a sense of urgency but not panic about how to engage on this topic, and you know how it fits into your world and the work that you're doing. So we'll do this deep dive into the kind of the what, how, and where. I just want to mention a few things that jump out to me in terms of thinking about this topic. We heard a little bit earlier today and throughout the conference thus far about all the goals that are out there on decarbonization. Maria Robinson talked about the net zero goals and the clean grid and building out the transmission system. We also have a number of goals set nationally around EV chargers, around EV sales. We have a lot of states getting into the act and setting a lot of transition targets as well for all sorts of EV fleets, including school buses. We have manufacturers that are making their own pledges and commitments. Everybody from Ford to GM and others that are moving in this direction as well. And then a number of the end users, the freight providers and freight users, Amazon and PepsiCo and IKEA and many, many others, as well as municipal fleets, ride-hailing companies, and utility fleets as well. So all of that is, you know, definitely signaling that we're moving in the direction of electrification. We just had a lot of funding come forward just in the last year alone from what Maria called Uncle Bill and Uncle Ira, which I love. I'm going to be using those terms repeatedly now. $30 billion for EVs and EV infrastructure in the Infrastructure Investor and Jobs Act, plus another big chunk of funding, around $62 billion or so around energy infrastructure. So, you know, a combination of things there. And then, of course, there's a big pot of funding that's coming from the Inflation Reduction Act, a total $370 billion dedicated to a variety of climate and clean energy investments that include many large pots of funding specifically around EVs and EV electrification, and a number of tax credits and other things as well. So all of that is coming into play, as well as this sense of urgency that I spoke to. And I'll just close with a mention of the resolution that was passed forward by my NARUC just last month with a call for acting rapidly to, I think I might be misquoting it, but it was a resolution on the urgency of preparing for widespread transportation electrification, and really I think just points to how many, many different players out there are realizing that there's a lot of reasons that we need to be planning now and acting now as well. So you're going to hear from these great speakers, and then we're going to engage with all of you and come up with some solutions. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. And thank you. Wonderful to be here. Thank you to GridWise Alliance for the invitation. What I really wanted to do was some ground setting, some understanding of where we are, as the mic came on, understanding of where we are, where we could be as the fleet gets electrified. It's sort of these two sides of the same coin. You've got the need for charging, and you've got the potential for grid resources from all these batteries. So I'm going to focus really on three fleets that are transitioning the quickest: the light-duty fleet, the electric school bus fleet, and transit fleet. And then for light duty, it's really a focus on what's called the short vehicles. So thinking a Ford F-150 is, a Ford F-250 is not. So just some understanding of these two sides. So thinking about these three segments. Right now, on the roads in the US, there's about 194 million light-duty vehicles. That doesn't include the 60 million sort of Ford F-250s and larger. About 500,000 school buses and about 1.1 million transit buses. These are not electric. This is what's there now. If we were to electrify, these are the numbers that we're looking at. This is the goals that folks have established to electrify all of these. We know that those goals and commitments are there from fleets, from governments, from utilities even. As well as the money is now there to do this as well, which is really an exciting opportunity. So thinking about the battery capacity, these are the average battery capacities of the current electric versions of these. So you got 6.6 kW in a light duty, 106 in a school bus. Transit buses can get really big. Here's a piece that's really interesting from that opportunity for the grid to use these resources. 95% of the time, your personal vehicle is parked. It's not doing anything. School buses, a little bit less, about 89%. And then transit buses, it will vary greatly depending on the jurisdiction. Some places have close to 24-hour transit services. Some will only have 12 hours. So these vehicles and this capacity is available a majority of the time. You can probably take out 10% for when they need to be charging, but it's still a lot of potential sitting there. The other thing to think about is how far do these vehicles go on a daily basis? Therefore, how much do they need to charge on a daily basis? We only drive about 35 miles a day on average nationally. School buses, about 75 miles. During the 180 days that the school is in session. And transit buses go the furthest. They do about 120 miles. Again, these are averages. Now, here's a piece that becomes really interesting. And I sort of will tell a little story from the lens of a recent Thanksgiving trip. For holiday travel, you see the AAA comes out and tells how many millions of Americans will be traveling this holiday weekend, when they'll be traveling. Imagine when they're all electrified. So that average holiday travel by automobile is about 250 miles. That's a long way to go, and you're probably going to need to charge. And there's going to be 54 million Americans traveling by car this Thanksgiving. We'll be traveling about 250 miles. I've been driving an EV for over 11 years now. This was the first time on the trip down to New York City from Vermont, where I live, that we actually had other vehicles at the charging stations. And some of those charging stations, there was only one charger. One time we were charged in and the VW showed up, disappointed. Another time the VW was charging and we showed up and disappointed. This will become a very interesting opportunity for utilities as they think about when and where they need to place chargers and what the capacity might need to be for these very special times, not the daily travel. That's going to be resolved, but for these long-distance trips that occur over holidays. So when might this be available? For folks who are not familiar with the National Household Travel Survey, it is your friend. For folks not available with the Bureau of Transportation Statistics, another friend. So this is the latest NHTS was done in 2017. They're done every 6 years. It's a national survey. And it shows sort of the time. And what I found interesting about this, it's about peak, when might peak charging occur? Looks a bit like a load shape. This is when Americans travel. These are the hours of the day that they're leaving home to go do something, whether it's shopping, going to social, recreation, commuting, which obviously that probably looks a little different these days, school, church, different activities. What are that time of day? This becomes really important for utilities to understand this travel behavior. So thinking about these new holiday peaks, this is from AAA, how people are going. This gets to that, it was 48.7 million Americans traveled by auto over Thanksgiving. That's a lot of cars on the road. And here's what's interesting. When are they traveling? There's a whole bunch that are traveling over 100 miles at the same time. Those are folks that are going to need to charge. So looking at this, again, this is from BTS, the Bureau of Transportation Statistics. You can begin to understand these travel patterns and these travel behaviors for time of day with this specific, this is just Thanksgiving. So that is sort of the quick look at where we are, where we could be, and hopefully some tools and tips for how you can figure out how you're going to incorporate this new travel into your utility plans, understanding not just where people travel, the origin destination, but when they travel, and the opportunity on the flip side of that, of the capacity for that 95% of the time when someone's car is just parked, and for the school buses and transit buses. So just some scene setting of the opportunity. All right.
All right. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, sure.
I think we all look at Thanksgiving a little bit differently now.
I will share.
Hopefully get better, yeah.
I don't know which mic's going to turn on, but we'll go from here. I share the same charging station experience over the past couple weeks and months as every station is full and maybe or may not be working as well. So that O&M and reliability perspective is certainly something we all should be striving for. So Marie Steele, I'm our Vice President of Electrification and Energy Services at NV Energy. For those of you who don't know, NV Energy is the investor-owned utility that serves a majority of the state of Nevada and also a broader part of the family of Berkshire Hathaway Energy. We have been involved in electric vehicles for a very long time. If you flip to the next slide, we've had electric vehicle time of use rate since 2009. We've had charging station investment program since 2013, right? Oh,
there you go.
I have control. I thought this was a mic. So we've had programs with infrastructure since 2013, and thinking of this IT/OT issue, we've actually seen the value of this managed charging since then, requiring that ability to communicate with those chargers since then. We also started the Nevada Electric Highway in partnership with the Governor's Office of Energy. Hi, Director Bobzian. But creating that infrastructure every 50 miles across Nevada's highways. And so we've been practicing that, quite frankly, since 2015. And so when I think of the IIJA investments and what's required, there's a lot of lessons learned there for us as well. And then over the past 2 years, we have two new plans, the Economic Recovery Transportation Electrification Plan, and then also a new plan in front of the Commission, which I will keep saying proposed to you all because I am in a docket right now. But recognizing the role the utility has to play in electric vehicles to accelerate transportation electrification, realize those environmental benefits and also the economic benefits for our state. Very specifically for Nevada, when I think of the opportunity of managed load, it's amazing, right? When I also think of the messaging that we're hearing right now about REVs going to break the grid, right? They're not, right? You have to plan for them appropriately. When I think of the investments that we need to make, infrastructure is the really easy part. That's what we know how to do. It's the other type of planning. But I wanted to share with you all how we think about it, right? I don't need to explain to you guys that, you know, this is a supply curve and the load forecast, but this is Nevada. You know, when we think of the load that we have to serve, especially in southern Nevada, the casinos and all the air conditioning on our hottest days, that's certainly a lot of excess capacity we have. And so when we look towards where we can put EV charging, it certainly is an opportunity. But NB Energy also created a new organization last year that I lead that puts all of those customer technologies together, right? So it's not just EVs. EVs actually almost never happen alone, right? It's battery storage compared with it, with energy efficiency, rooftop solar. So how do we optimize all of that load together? So I have all of the customer technologies. I also have integrated grid planning and the distributed resource plan. So when I think of the conversation we just had about integrated grid planning, how do we do that distributed and DER forecast and integrate it into the IRP? And then believe me, it's an iterative process. There is no right way to do it or that. So I wanted you guys to know how we're thinking about it, but it certainly is an opportunity there. And then when we think about how we want to put new load somewhere, we've actually proposed that our EVTOU, that off-peak period changes. So creating that solar sponge. We are actually curtailing solar in some of our morning hours, and so if we can put this new load in the morning, so our off-peak period is now actually midnight to noon, right? And then also investing in an advanced DERM system, replacing our old DRMS, recognizing technology and tariff is really going to help us get there. And so, like I just talked about it, the infrastructure is the easy part. How are we going about planning for this and really setting a blueprint for the future? And so part of it's a workforce, right? How do we build and develop this and also make sure that we're reaching into the communities that we serve? And also a planning perspective. So some of the things we're thinking about is transportation analytics and planning tools. We have great energy planning tools. And so now we're in a whole new world about how do we overlay behavior on top of our energy planning and wanting to do that. Also electric vehicle load identification and disaggregation. We're also proposing a Rule 9, which is our line extension policy, an EV allowance adder to really enable these building codes to happen as well. The technology co-optimization, so smart panels on top of it, that's a huge component of the IRA, right? As well as the Inflation Reduction Act innovation demonstration. You may or may not have noticed that the bill just passed as we were putting the plan together. So lots of points back to the policy. And then as well in the residential space, infrastructure paired with other components. So we have V2G charger, a charger plus a battery plus rooftop solar. We're also recognizing that there's going to be 2 EVs per household very soon and potentially 3. So what does 2 chargers and this battery do together? So co-optimizing all that technology. And then as well, system integration, right? So we got technical requirements, performance requirements, integration into our DERMS, and then also that direct billing from your billing component. So if you have your control and your billing in one system, really how much you can accomplish there. And then lastly, with our flexible load, right? We think back to that opportunity. Managed charging is going to be huge. Tariffs are going to be large. And I think as we lead into our next thing as well, we also do have an electric school bus vehicle to grid trial tariff, compensating school buses for that export back into the grid. So that's the framework of the investments. We're thinking incremental to just the infrastructure. Because if we're going to realize all of the opportunities and the benefits from this, it's not just the charging infrastructure. So look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, and thanks, Marie. I think if Karen kind of maybe raised her
point.
blood pressure a little bit. Thank you, Marie, for giving us the confidence and an example of your utility and how you're already planning for the future or planning for the now, really. I'll turn it over to Amy.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Amy McGuire from Highland Electric Fleets. We do school buses, as you can see on the slide. Happy to be here and really awesome to follow these fine people to talk a little bit about what all of this is about and exactly, I think, as you said, Marie, not breaking the grid with all of our electric vehicles. Definitely not our plan. In fact, we feel like school buses are probably the things that, some of the things that can really help not break the grid and in fact, improve it drastically. So before I dive into that, I just wanted to explain a little bit about Highland. We're a startup, started a few years ago. We currently have the largest deployment of electric school buses in North America, and we have the first, and we think only fully commercially operational V2G program. So we actually are doing exactly as was described, pushing power back from our big yellow boxes. So we're supporting the grid in National Grid territory and in Green Mountain Power's territory up in Vermont. Yeah, so that's, again, a little bit about what Highland is. I'm going to focus on our V2G programs, but happy to answer questions sort of on the side about how we do all of that, because I also think that's pretty cool. So maybe a level setting question is sort of why start with school buses? And part is that they're easier. As we started the company, we looked at a lot of the different use cases and a lot of the different vehicle types that are out in the wild and electrified, and there are a lot, which is cool, of course. But school buses not only have the benefit when electrified of cleaning up the air that our children breathe every day going back and forth to school, so win number one, but they have really predictable, relatively short routes. They go back typically to one place altogether, and they have relatively large batteries that, as Karen pointed out, sit around for a large amount of the time, and they happen to sit around the most amount of the time during typical peak electric use time, which is the summer. So for all those reasons, we figured that school buses would be a good place to start if we were going to try out this whole vehicle to grid thing, becoming an energy asset as a vehicle. So what does it look like? As I pointed out, there's a little box on the bottom right there about our real results out in the field. And so we're pretty proud of being able to participate for quite a number of hours in as I said, in Massachusetts and Vermont. I need to update this slide, but also wanted to sort of just show what it would look like then from there as we scale up, that is our intention, is to really grow and be able to cover more and more load. So you can see there are, what was it, 500,000 school buses across the country, and just with 1,000, we're already getting at a really large number of homes covered for a very large amount of time, as a kind of good way to simplify it all. I know the audience is well versed in this, but we think it's a good way to help talk about it. So again, just highlighting, this is our actual performance in Massachusetts. So we have our software platform that manages all of this, and Marie, you highlighted that's sort of part and parcel of all the effort is making sure you can manage it all. So we've invested quite a lot in making sure that our software platform can not only keep track of where all the buses are, how they're operating, but when they're charging and then when they're discharging, and even when they're having any errors, troubleshooting, so you can see the full charge and then discharge of our buses over a few days this summer. And then, again, wanted to just lay it out for you all what we look at when we're doing our bus V2G projects, and how you can see how quickly it scales up. And this is real life. These are the buses that we operate, the chargers we use in partnership with Rhombus, and how integral our partnership is with our utilities. So of course we are very pleased to see planning ahead and making sure that all of this is not only planning for it to happen, but making sure it all makes sense for both sides, customer and grid side. I think that's it for now, but yeah, happy to continue the conversation. I guess you probably don't need that.
Okay, all right. Thank you all very much. We're going to move into a little bit more of a conversation. I'm going to just flag one thing for the audience, which is this fabulous report that the GridWise Alliance put out back in February, looking at near-term grid investments around this topic of electric vehicle integration. And that was after the The IIJA came out, lots of really great ideas in here to point to if you want kind of a little bit more of a broader roadmap on things. So I want to thank Karen and her team on this. Karen's been a great supporter of our electric school bus work as she serves on a advisory council for us. So I also want to thank her for that as well. This came up a little bit in each of your presentations, but I did want to talk about the technology side of things, acknowledging that that's not the only piece of what we're looking at here and the only piece of what it means to make the grid or help the grid be ready for EVs. But how would you, each of you or any of you, describe the level of technology readiness as we kind of look ahead, knowing where we're at now, but knowing, as Karen was pointing out, the large fleets that have yet to be electrified? Just kind of give us a sense of how you're feeling about where we're at right now, and do we have that technology that we need to deploy?
I'll go. I mean, yes, but it's obviously evolving, right? And so, from a regulated utility perspective, certainly the time and planning that with your commission certainly takes time. And so I don't envy folks who aren't actively been talking about their commission about transportation electrification for the past decade, right? Because the learning and the evolution is there, but we're certainly recognizing that technology control investment is going to be super critical, but can already see that from air conditioners, right? When you think of what you're curtailing is irrespective of what technology it is, but super exciting. But when I think of it for our customers, right, the biggest thing that we can support them is the analysis. That's been our biggest service we've provided for the past 5 years, is helping them understand and analyzing it for them. But lots of technology investments required.
I would agree that evolving was the word that came to mind, and I think what I showed were the existing capacities of these vehicles. We know that on the light-duty side, the batteries have grown dramatically, range is going to increase, and the charging rates are going to be. Those are the two factors. How far can you go on a single charge, and how long does it take you to recharge? And those are both going to, one will get longer, one will get shorter, right? You'll have a longer range and a shorter time to recharge, which will put more, that need for quick power is going to grow. And I think we're also seeing part of the evolution. I just focus on those three fleets, right? The light duty, school bus, and transit. There's 8 million motorcycles out there. There's all the off-road machines that we're seeing coming into play, electric tractors. And so I think we're going to see more and more, anything with wheels will get electrified, but I think it's evolving, and we'll get, I think that's the right word for me.
Yeah, I think reiterating or amplifying what you all have said, certainly we see all the major bus manufacturers have electric vehicles, and there are there's good charging options out there. I think when it comes to bidirectional chargers, we're hoping that the market will continue to expand and continue to evolve, but there is great technology out there in the market today, and we use it. So evolving is great. I think even over the last year, from our first year in National Grid's Connected Solutions program to this year, just in that span of time, our ability and the ease with which we could participate has improved drastically. I mean, I don't want to say duct tape was used, but in the first year, but it took a lot of effort to make it work, and a lot of time to perfect the technologies that we use. But with all the partners in place, I think, and the desire to make it work, you can just see how quickly it can move. So that's pretty exciting.
Okay, that again gives me some comfort. Hopefully, other folks in the room comfort as well. I mean, certainly we're a far way out from having it all solved, but we've got some of the tools we need to get there. I'm going to actually jump down to a question about equity. Already heard that topic come up throughout the course of the conference, and that's a topic that comes up when we think about, any technology development, but specifically within transportation electrification, and the opportunity to bring more equity-centered options into this effort, and then, of course, avoid perpetuating some of the inequities that underlie where we're at today. So I'd just be really curious where you see that coming about in the planning work that we're undertaking or should be undertaking, and how the utilities are focusing their investments, what the opportunities are within the school bus fleet. Just wanted to get a little more insights into that piece of things.
I'll mention a little bit, because part of the work that the Center for Sustainable Energy does is we administer large-scale programs on behalf of states and utilities in the electric vehicle infrastructure, as well as energy storage and solar. On the EV side, we're seeing more and more states moving towards not just electric bikes as part of their equity play, but also used vehicles, and even replace your ride. So you have a fossil fuel vehicle for an equity play, providing incentives to get rid of the fossil fuel, turn that in, and to get a used EV. So we're seeing growing interest in not just the purchase of a new EV, because as we know, very few Americans buy a new vehicle. Most will buy a used vehicle. So from an equity perspective, that, as well as the investment in transit as part of it as well. So it's the vehicles, but also where you place the chargers to get some of the local air pollution out. Yeah.
Well, very fortunately for us, right, a huge focus across all of our customer programs, but the enabling legislation that created our latest transportation electrification investments, historically underserved communities were defined in statute. And so there was a 40% requirement there, but it also is applied across our energy efficiency and demand response programs. And if you can measure it, right, it's so much easier to be able to put this into your GIS systems and map out investments, and also into your billing system, so you can identify these customers across these groups and make those investments and reach out in a whole different way with your community-based organizations. So a great focus and success there. It's a little bit different than the Justice 40 definitions and the IIJA, and then fortunately the IRA ITC for the charging infrastructure even has a little bit more of a tweak, right? But that's easy to manage. So not consistent definitions, but following that same theme around making sure that we're keeping those communities with us. Another big focus of ours, right, as well, from an equity perspective on energy, is NV Energy's owned charging stations that we can own and operate. The tariff is set at the residential TOU, following that paradigm of people should be able to charge the same price in public infrastructure as they can get in the residential home. And that really helping folks that don't have access to chargers at home, right? And so if they only have the availability to charge in public infrastructure, we'll have that same pricing structure for them as well, really following an equity in play there as well. And then a large focus on our school bus and transit programs as well, that the investments we first deploy will be serving routes that serve those neighborhoods defined with our historically underserved communities. So really a paramount and center of our design of our programs, making sure that we're serving those communities.
Yeah, I think Sue and I probably feel pretty similarly about school bus electrification being at the center of equity work in a lot of ways. I think historically underserved communities have not only had terrible things going on with busing overall, but also have bus depots, diesel bus depots cited in their communities, and therefore air quality much worse, and then therefore the public negative health impacts of that much greater. So simply by getting to be part of Highland Electric Fleets and removing that negative impact is, I feel really lucky to be able to work in this space just for that very reason. And then to knowing that the way we have come up with our business model and tried to make it as affordable and accessible as we can, and being able to leverage private capital and things like bulk purchasing, and then access to incentive programs and utility programs, and then piling on potential revenues through future or existing or future V2G programs, we're allowing any and all communities to access that electrification. So for me, part of why I wanted to work at Highland in the first place was because most every community has yellow boxes rolling around, and for the most part, today, they are terribly toxic, and we can change that, and we can change it now, and then we can work to benefit everyone simply by electrifying those, because we'll have a bunch of big batteries rolling around that can support our grid and potentially eliminate the need for gas peaker plants or other fossil fuel generation going forward. If we can close capacity gaps with those new clean boxes, that's pretty cool. So yeah, for all of those reasons, I think Highland gets to be pretty well aligned with our equity goals.
Can I add to something Marie said, just sort of that notion of working with community-based organizations and the critical component and voice they bring to a design of a program, as well as its acceptance and adoption by those communities. I think that's a really important piece that we adopt in our programs, is we have actual contracts with community-based organizations. It's not just sort of we talk to them and they go on, but they are under contract to help engage in that. So there's some capacity building for the CBOs as well. So that's a critical piece of equity.
Yeah, getting them at the table from the get-go.
Yeah, and not just being invited to the table, but being welcomed. Welcomed.
Yeah, not a token. Yeah.
We're making that evolution as well,
yeah,
right? Is engaging them as partners and pushing out the messaging, and also workforce development. And so it's great. That's continued learning, right? That that iterative. So.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, you've got three fabulous experts here. Want to hear what questions you have for all of them, one of them, several of them. If you want to raise your hand, I know we've got people with mics. Good. Yeah.
Hi, Amy.
You want to wait for the mic, please? Thanks.
Yeah, Kay Kaufman from RTO Insider. I was curious because you didn't mention your Montgomery County school buses and what's going on with PJM. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I alluded to it, I guess, but yes, Montgomery County, Maryland is our largest project to date. We have goals for electrifying their full fleet, and you're correct. We're in PJM and work closely with Pepco at the utility there to electrify 5 depots, and we'll be deploying in this first phase 375 school buses. I believe we're either working or are currently active in the PJM ancillary market. So we're using those buses as ancillary service entities, assets today, which is also really very exciting. And you're absolutely right to point out that that's another way that we can use them as B2G assets.
Yeah. Just to compound on that, right? When we think of the sizing of a market, right? I recognize not all of you are from Nevada, but we have very large school districts. And so Clark County, that serves almost the entirety of southern Nevada. So it's one decision maker, almost 2,000 buses.
Yeah.
And when we think of that, and it has 5 depot yards across.
To talk to them.
It has 5 depot yards across southern Nevada, and at the current battery size, that's about 500 megawatts of battery capacity. When I just told you about our excess solar, right, and so a huge opportunity for us, and have an electric school bus vehicle to grid trial program, not just for them, but for all the school districts. But that resource opportunity is very large, right, when you think about it.
Oh, no, thank you. Question in the back, and then we can go up here.
A company called Electro Tempo. Oh, there we go. We specialize in charging demand projections for grid planning initiatives. So I'm curious, what have your been early learnings in integrating with the regulatory process to try to work some of these charging demand estimates that you've developed? Maybe specifically Nevada, since it sounds like you're way ahead of the curve, but it seems like people are trying to figure it out as they go. So what have you learned from the early stages of trying to integrate with those processes?
So our distributed resource plan was actually created out of legislation in 2017. And so our evolution of learning about the distributed resource plan and DER forecasting is definitely evolutionary, right? And so there's also, when you think about, so I've been in the EV space probably over 10 years now, 11 years, right? And so, I was on a panel before, and like not everybody thought this day was going to come. And so we've had EV load forecast in our IRP for, a decade now, and it's at flatline at 1%, right, out into the 30 years. And so when you think about, and in this last IRP, we raised it, right? And that what the conversation that caused was intense, right? But that's the whole point of the regulatory process, so that the model gets put forth and you can challenge it. But that was at the macro level, and in our next IRP, we'll put that at the feeder level. And so it's fascinating because it's not solar, it's not storage. EV very specifically involves a human making decisions that aren't economic, right? They can now charge whenever they want. They can charge one day, not for the rest of the week. How we dispatch batteries is almost economic. You can forecast that. Right, so we're certainly learning together. We don't have it perfected, right? But certainly tools and transparency in how we're planning for it has been a big learning curve for us. Not learning curve, but just something paramount with our regulator is that transparency. And I forget the gentleman's name who up here before is. He said he was never wrong. I will say I'm always wrong. If there's anything that we know about a forecast is that it's not right, but at least you know what the assumptions are. So being really transparent about that. But it's certainly a load forecast that brings about a lot of conversation as you present that and change it, because people have a lot of opinions that not necessarily aren't based in technical decisions, right? There's a lot of politics behind it. So we're excited about it, but a lot more tools, right? When it's just a static study, it gets challenged a lot. And so I don't know if that helps or not, or maybe just gives you a little bit of feel better that it's not just you.
Can I sort of add on? I think sort of the notion of a dynamic tool that can forecast EV adoption based on external factors.
Yep.
What kind of incentives exist? What kind of regulatory interventions exist? What's the adoption rate so far in this jurisdiction? Some of the socioeconomic developments can help create that load forecast. And it's interesting, probably about 15 years ago, I did a study of EVs in IRPs around the country. And what we found was that there was no rhyme or reason to which kind of utility included it or not, whether they were large, small, muni, co-op, IOU, even geographic. And we just decided that there must have been some champion within that utility who says we need to think about this going forward. But now it's here. So understanding what those pushes and pulls for that adoption rate, I think could be really helpful for utilities.
Yeah, maybe just to follow on to that question, it strikes me that if we're talking about fleets, where you have a little bit more of a known entity of the vehicles and the depots where they're charging, and maybe even the routes, that they're typically using, and maybe where you can weigh in on this, that at least might help you with a portion of what you might be encountering. I mean, is that kind of some of how you're looking at this?
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of having all these tools now, and the technology and the information, right? But it's still a purchase decision has to be made. When I think of the fleets, at least operationally, you understand how it's going to operate once they have it. It's just, from a utility perspective, putting in the load forecast, right? It just starts challenging if you start layering it on top of each other. And so getting into the scenario analysis, if all the school buses go, when do all the school buses go, right? Transit. So you can now see it. I'm in a much better spot of having one state, right? And so it's a little easier to manage one state. But there's an abundance of great tools that are coming about, especially in these past couple of years, on how to look into this and how to integrate it and how to use our own data to then make the information even better. But yeah, it's almost scary. Scary is not the right word, but now you almost know how much you don't know, right? Like it's a little bit of that right now.
Yeah, okay. There was a question up front. Sorry, I think that was Larry, and then maybe one over here too. Okay.
Really quickly, can you talk to warranty issues and/or how bus owners are looking at that, and how available, how much can they use? Can you describe that just a little bit?
About, you mean like
Well, a warranty of the bus, you're using my
Integrating
battery, and it's going to wear the battery down faster. How should I be thinking about that?
Sure. Well, we feel really confident that our buses and the batteries in them can do pretty much whatever we need them to do. We'll of course do our due diligence on sort of excessive use, I guess I would say. But overall, we're really confident in the technology. We're confident that the batteries will last longer than even the OEMs are ready to say at the moment. We, for example, our contracts with school districts, typically we look to do a 15-year contract with our partner, our customers, our school districts. And most warranties for bus manufacturers today are in the 7-year timeframe. And what we'll do is basically add in an extended warranty up to the time of our contract. So we're willing to underwrite to that today. And we'll do that with full knowledge that we may and plan to use those buses not only for the duty cycle of the school, but outside as energy assets if we can. So we're very confident in the technology and the ability to use it. One other way I often think about it is when you're dispatching the battery as storage, it's a very discrete amount of power that you're pushing for a specified amount of time, right? As opposed to when you're driving the bus, you're doing all sorts of things to the battery. So it's actually much less wear and tear on the battery to dispatch it as a V2G asset than driving. So for all of those reasons and others that we've looked into, I think we can go even beyond 15 years and feel comfortable that the battery in the buses will do great. So yeah, that's our stance anyway.
Can I
have
add
a
on to
question.
that?
Yeah.
Oh, Karen. I was just going to add on to, because that's the beauty of having a singular entity, right, to contract with. So I will say in our research on this, recognizing a school district might be contracting specifically, the OEMs are differentiating themselves based upon their warranty on the buses and that dispatch and what it does to the warranty as well. So just an FYI for everyone, when you school districts, if they have the ability to choose whichever bus, if it's an incentive program, there's certainly differentiation on the warranty contracts for these buses, for especially school buses.
Yeah, but it does, can I just sort of add on and get to you, is that notion that this is a new revenue stream for schools if they have this battery. So thinking about it not just as a mode of transportation, but a revenue stream. So even if the battery, does go down a little, the compensation for that is ideally there, right? Yeah.
So this is a little follow-on on compensation. And Marie, I think you said something about how current EV drivers are not that responsive to price, but lots of drivers are really responsive to the price of gas, and they'll go across the street for a difference of a penny in a gallon. And I'm wondering if what you're saying right now is that time of use pricing probably isn't that effective, but is that because the early drivers of EVs have money, and that as you add fleets who are managing large amounts of budget to the margins, or you're going to lower income EV drivers, that maybe you will see a greater increase in the responsiveness to time of use? Because otherwise, everything you're trying to do is not sending the signal you want.
Well, very fortunately, businesses are almost always going to make economic decisions, right? And so that's very fortunate. And if you can just do tariff design around that, such that if a new signal would move their load to a more beneficial place, that certainly utilities can put in front of their commission. Rate design is part of our mandate that, like, if there needs to be a different tariff, we can certainly put it there. So good news, right? Commercial entities, I once was the president of the Southern Nevada Fleet Association, so take this from have worked with fleet owners for a very long time. So I am very fortunate also to have one of the early transit adopters, RTC Washoe, to do electric buses. And so I've spent many years of folks having an early adopter and understanding, needing to design much better for our future use cases. But a residential perspective, when I think about it, so we have about 25% adoption on our electric vehicle residential time of use rate. But time of use rates is optional in Nevada, and so if you have the opportunity, and it also applies to your whole home. So we're very fascinated now to also learn this load disaggregation, being able even to identify level 1 charging, if it actually just is knowledge, right? Maybe they just don't know about the tariff. Like, I love to tell people, not everyone follows our Twitter account. You don't usually follow your local investor-owned utilities emails. right? So how do we get this messaging out to folks that these tariffs actually exist, and can that actually have a huge realization of benefits from, I don't need 72 tariffs, I just need people to know that there was one, right? And so looking at that from every single angle to see how much we can move in the residential space, because very specifically for Southern Nevada, unmanaged charging is coincident to my air conditioning load. And so I have a huge risk at peak, but also a great opportunity almost every other month and every other hour of the day, that if I can get you out of 7 to 9, you're at a benefit, right? And so how do I do that?
Yeah, excellent, good. I think there was a question over here, maybe it's still out there. Okay, well, go back to the middle then.
Thanks. I love what you guys are doing. Applaud it. The question, I guess, is probably for Marie, but if anybody else wants to comment, I was at a meeting recently where a senior utility person said, look, we've been looking at fleet adoption in our service territory, and if all the fleet vehicles were to convert to electric in, let's say, in the next 10 years, it would add more than 30 gigawatts of capacity needs to our system. And their system now is less than that. It's 25 or whatever, right? And obviously, you're not going to build for everybody charging exactly at the same time. But when you're dealing with fleets, you do have a lot of coincident you are going to have a lot of coincident charging, right?
Yeah.
I worry that utilities, at least in transportation hubs, metro area kind of things, are underestimating the impact, because that's not just generation, that's transmission, and probably a lot of distribution, a lot of control systems, a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And it feels like we're behind already.
Yeah, I mean, I get the sentiment, right? You had me concerned that you said it was someone from your utility, and I was like, oh God, who said that? Our job is to serve power. That is our sole purpose. Our sole job is to plan for this, right? And so there certainly is some iterative learning, but when I think about it, when I think about that residential load, we're already looking at distribution design standards. When do we inject more into the distribution system to do the maintenance to upkeep, right? How do we facilitate building codes so that we're building for the future? And then we already have all of our large fleets mapped onto our system. I know where every single school district and transit fleet is on my system. Is that next to a constrained substation and feeder? Like, I know all of this already, right? And so it's how do I optimize for it? But moving it is super critical. I also recognize not everybody has the same excess capacity that we do. There's other folks that probably are going to be in a little bit worse of a spot. But with that technology and tariff signal, and then also when we think of for 2222, right, if these batteries also play a role as generation, right? And so how do we facilitate that such that it's load and a resource back? But it's not fun to get into the wonky part of planning conversations, and so we really struggle with that as an industry to explain to folks, this is our sole job, right? There is some issues with setting power and transformers and having the ability to get power the exact moment that you need it, but in the long term, I think we're in a really good spot to support all electrification, matching it with our decarbonization goals.
And one thing I'd add in is that I think there's a big role for organizations like ours to play in being really good partners with the utilities, right? Like, we can help bring not only our expertise and understanding of how we operate and what we need, but we can also offer our services and the benefits that our assets provide, but we can also negotiate or collaborate on, look, you really might actually break the grid at this moment, so just like don't, or let's figure out how you don't need to. But we, together in conversation, we can figure that out. And of course, it's a little harder for each, if we're talking about school buses, for each single school to have that conversation with the utilities. But I think that's something that we as Highland are lucky enough to do, to sort of facilitate that, quote, good behavior on behalf of electric fleets. So I'm confident that we'll be able to figure it out together.
Excellent. We have time for maybe one more question. It's a burning one out there. Well, I'd love to close us out with one more. No. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Hey, quick question. We had a meeting recently with state officials, and the question was around how much, speaking of equity and the like, and affordability, and you have the notion of EV electrification, all the promise it has, but it's taking place against a backdrop of larger transformation. So what we were challenged with is there's going to be new transmission that needs to be built. There's additional distribution utility investments that need to be made, including broadband for equity and affordability reasons. And we have EV charging networks to build. What is the sequence planned, and what is the proportion of dollars and costs that EV, in your mind, the EVs have, and where is like the master plan so we can understand if there's healthcare and education, these were public officials, and healthcare and all these
I was like,
costs.
healthcare, right.
Exactly.
I had ya.
Right. If we have all these other demands on the public wheel, if you will, how do I know what is the right investment to make it EV infrastructure at this time against all the electric utility industry investments that need to be made?
It's going to be it's an iterative process, right? In our transportation electrification investments, I'll say our state is an amazing partner, right? There's not a moment I'm not talking to my director of Office of Energy or our Department of Transportation, right? But our bill that enabled this legislation also came with an RTO, right? Also came with, more rooftop solar, more EE&DR, recognizing the role of conservation. So the bill came with this, let's look at it from a holistic, integrated look, recognizing our decarbonization goals, because it's going to be required. What I do like on the transportation electrification, that's now part of our distributed resource plan, so we have to go in every 3 years, because the reality is I don't know what I need 3 years from now. I don't know what medium heavy duty is really going to look like and what role hydrogen's going to play, and actually how much load do we actually need to serve hydrogen, rather, if that's the fuel source. But that iterative 3-year look on what's going to be needed for transportation electrification, but also that planning tool, right? Because none of us want to write a blank check, right? Like what's actually required in the public sphere, recognizing 80 to 90% of charging is going to happen at home, right? We don't need limitless infrastructure to facilitate public charging. And so if we have these transportation tools to help us understand how much we need and where does it need to be sited to meet the moment that we're in, will really be necessary as we look at the investments going forward. So I don't have the perfect sequencing, but recognizing it has to happen together. When we think of this load as we develop a market, right, and facilitating all of our 100% renewables, and how do I match this load growth to the need of, in the changing supply side scenario as well, so.
All right, well, now we're going to try to close things out with an even faster lightning round. Just want to give each of you a magic wand and ask you to say, what would you change? One thing that you would change to make this all happen more easily, more efficiently, more equitably. Just what's your one thing? And we'll do Amy, Marie, and end with Karen.
Oh, boy. Okay. What would I change? You put this down in the prep, and I couldn't think of anything then. I think one thing I would like to change is if I could magically sort of, I guess it's allay fears, but it's broad education, right? I think there's a lot of just a lack of awareness of what's out there now, what it can do, that it works. There's range anxiety about like I couldn't possibly have an EV because I can't go to my grandmother's house, and that's just not true. So I think if I could magic, it would just be to bring everyone to the same level of understanding about technologies that are available today.
Cool. All right.
I would definitely agree with that, because we sit in this room and we think everybody's at the same spot, and they are not. I was at some legislative caucuses last week that were in Southern Nevada, and people are not at the same spot, right? But to the point of, are we going to break the grid, and can we do this? Going and working with your electric utilities early, right? When we think of these really large fleets, those don't happen in 6 months or even a year. We've been talking to our school districts for years, and we don't even have a bus yet, right? Like that's the level of planning that is required. So I say early and often talk to your electric utility. If your fleet manager is even thinking about it, call your MAE, right? And so that's what I really push with folks, because success is going to come with long-range planning with your customers.
Excellent.
And I would put mine under a bucket of soft cost, permitting, connections, and the planning, and getting Department of Transportation planning, which is, statutorily required, and timing and what's included, including all their traffic models that exist by which they generate their projections, combined with utility planning and combined with telecom planning. All of those three sectors have their regulatory and statutory planning requirements, and they're happening in their own. So your DOT's got their EV plans, your utilities have their EV plans, and your telecoms have different plans, but finding a way to bring those plans into harmony.
Okay, well, great. Let's end it there and say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.